In the late 1980s, heavy metal wasn't just music. It was a movement, a culture built on empowerment, escapism, and the belief that anyone, no matter how weird, loud, or outcast, could carve out a place in the world. But by the early 90s, the world collapsed seemingly overnight. Metal had vanished from the radio and MTV. Stadium tours all but evaporated. A new sound, a dark, brooding, drenched in disillusionment, melancholy, and drop D took over. Some say it was just a shift in taste. Others believe that something far more calculated happened behind the scenes. In this video, we will explore the theory known as the grunge conspiracy. The idea that the record industry didn't just embrace grunge, they weaponized it. As an appetizer for what's to come, I'd like you to check out this snippet of an interview with Eddie Trunk from a film called Dio, Dreamers Never Die.
You're talking to a guy who worked in rock radio for decades. I literally saw the day the program director comes in and says, all of these CDs in a box, no more. Here's what we're playing now. There's a big misconception that the birth of Nirvana and all that took down the quote-unquote hair bands, and it certainly did. But it didn't discriminate to just that. It took down everything. Everybody got hit with that. I don't care if you were Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, whoever you were, across the board was one of the most harsh, abrupt things I've ever seen in my life. All of this goes away, and all of this is suddenly uncool. It was like that, cut and dry.
Heavy metal in the 80s was loud, theatrical, and unapologetically optimistic. Beneath the leather and pyrotechnics, married a message that heavy metal gave to its fans. You can rise above. You can fight back. You can be more. Songs celebrated personal strength, unity, and resilience. Fans found community in the mosh pit, not despair. In the industry, they loved it. Heavy metal sold out arenas, moved millions of albums, and created some of the most loyal fan bases in music history. But success, it breeds scrutiny. And by the late 80s, heavy metal's influence, especially on the youth, was becoming too big to ignore. The record industry is driven by trends, but it's also driven by control. Heavy metal bands were notoriously independent. They wrote their own music, shaped their own image, and built grassroots followings that didn't rely on a corporate polish. To some executives, heavy metal was becoming unpredictable, too empowering, too self-sustaining. Artists who were more important than the industry behind them. Then came a new sound from Seattle. Very raw and unfiltered and emotionally heavy, a sound that executives could shape and market and repackage not only as authentic rebellion, but this sort of soundtrack to being a victim. Grunge wasn't just a new genre. It was an opportunity. Grunge emerged organically from the Pacific Northwest. And there's no conspiracy there, but the speed and force with which the industry elevated it, that's where this theory comes into play. Within months, labels poured money into signing Seattle bands, left and right. MTV shifted its entire identity. Radio playlists flipped overnight, and the messaging changed dramatically. Where heavy metal said, you can overcome, grunge said, everything is broken. Where heavy metal said, stand tall, take your own power, grunge said, sink into the truth of your pain. It wasn't that grunge was bad, it was powerful, and it was honest, and culturally important, and came from someplace real. But the sudden aggressive push, it raised eyebrows. The metal it encouraged independence. It encouraged self-empowerment. Grunge, intentionally or not, leaned into themes of apathy, emotional collapse, disillusionment, victimhood, completely downtrodden and you can't make your way out of it. It was easier to market, easier to contain, easier to control. Heavy metal bands had become too big, too expensive, and too self-directed. Therein lies the problem. Grunge bands were cheaper, newer, more malleable. They swayed against the idea of theatrics and showmanship, and it was just guys dressed in throwaway clothing looking like they were a heartbeat away from being homeless themselves. The industry wanted a new youth identity, one that aligned with the early 90s recession, cynicism, generational uncertainty, to be honest. Grunge fit that mode perfectly. The press framed heavy metal as outdated, shallow, cartoonish, while grunge was hailed as real, pure, the voice of a generation. This wasn't organic, it was orchestrated. And whether intentional or not, the effect was undeniable. Heavy metal was pushed out of the spotlight with stunning efficiency. There's a tale that Janie Lane says that when they put out Cherry Pie, they were all over the CBS offices. And when they came in to introduce their next album, Dog Eat Dog, they laughed it out of the room, and in place of their big Cherry Pie album cover was an Alice in Chains cover. Between 1991 and 1994, heavy metal's presence in the mainstream culture evaporated. Bands that once sold millions suddenly couldn't get radio airplay. Labels dropped the artist en masse. MTV stopped airing heavy metal videos almost entirely. And it wasn't just a shift. This isn't radio and music taste changing. It was a seeming purge. Fans who once had hope and energy, this music that lifted them up in heavy metal, were now told their music was not only uncool, but it was a joke, a relic, a punchline. And grunge, again, intentionally or not, filled the void with this darker emotional palette. So the question is, was this deliberate? Some insiders say yes. They claim executives openly discussed resetting the market and killing the glam metal era. Others argue it was simply capitalism reacting to a new trend. Let me interject here that even when disco became the rage, rock and roll was still on the bookends of it. Rock and roll didn't suffer at the expense of disco. Disco is just another genre. Grunge was wholesale different. And to be honest, even skeptics admit the speed, coordination, and intensity of the shift was not only unusual, it was unnatural. Whether conspiracy or coincidence, the result was the same. Heavy metal's positive, empowering message was drowned out by a tidal wave of flannel and feedback. Today, both genres coexist peacefully. Metal roared back stronger than ever, and grunge remains a vital chapter in music history, but not the mega beast that it was. But the theory persists because it taps into something deeper. The idea that music isn't just entertainment, it is influence. And influence is something powerful people always try to control. Heavy metal has positivity. It is steeped in positivity. Yeah, you can cherry pick the negative bands that talk about doom and gloom. But for the most part, heavy metal, especially the metal that went global, was about empowering not only yourself, but others, raising up everyone. A rising tide, raise all ships. It was it made you feel like you could do anything. It wasn't mired in victimhood. It wasn't mired in the fact that your dad didn't give you enough hugs, that your mom maybe drank too much and didn't pay enough attention to you after school. This was about, if that happened, that you don't crawl in your bed and get up under the covers and become depressed, that you rise up and you identify yourself, because you do not see yourself through the eyes of others, but you see yourselves through the eyes of positivity, and you see yourself as someone who can make change. There's a quote, I'm going to butcher it, but the message is, be ashamed of dying until you do something positive for humanity. And that was painted all over heavy metal. There is a reason that heavy metal came back the way that it did, came back so strong and so powerful, and that it still stands today. That bands today aren't trying to be Nirvana. They're trying to be Motley Crue. They want to be that band that's giving out positive energy, that says positive things. Grunge was no different than disco. It just had the corporations behind it. In the end, maybe the real conspiracy isn't about grunge or heavy metal. Maybe it's about who gets to decide what generations hear. But I'll tell you this, one of the best things to ever happen to music is Napster. The fact that record companies died en masse a decade after they did what they did to the music that was so positive and had such a beautiful effect on the masses. Look at heavy metal's great artist and look at grunge's greatest artist, and you will notice two things. In heavy metal, they are either still alive and touring or they died of old age. In grunge, most of them never saw 50 because of the negative, vile, disgusting, apathetic, drug-infused life they live. Keith Richards still lives, and there have been entire generations that have been born and that have died in his wake. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about this. I wanted to thank my subscribers for joining me on this little dive into something a bit different than what I usually post about the grunge conspiracy. And you know what? Have a good one. I'll see you in the next video. Later.